Okay, let's make a start. So, feet down below your knees, and your weight a little bit forward. So the overall posture ends up, you see where my knees are above my feet, or maybe further back. I mean, you can shuffle it around a little bit. What you don't want is that knees overextended, or this, except when we do the reclining posture. So that feels about right. They're between my ankles and my knees, and then I just tilt forward slightly, so you can see I've come a little bit away from the upright position, but I still have this imaginary line going down that I'm kind of tethered to, and just rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder and your arms. Other side. Upper part of your chest. Your belly. Finally, relax. Okay. Sit back. Feet out in front of you. Let your weight drop back into the chair. Sort of get a sense of just sinking into the chair, melting into the chair. So we get this stage, sometimes referred to as emptying. Some schools of Tai Chi put a great emphasis on this. So the main emphasis on just not resisting, basically. And so emptying of the tension, the tightness, the stiffness in that sense. I mean, it's an important first stage, and that's why I do this posture first. It's not one that we would normally use, but sometimes it's easier just to get that complete sense of letting go, relaxing, however you care to think about it. And just to notice the effect this has on your body. So bringing your attention into your body via your breathing, perhaps, or just that feeling of sinking into the chair, and awareness of your posture in general. And as you sort of enter that inner landscape of the body, there's just a moment, just like walking through the gate into a woodland. You just maybe just stop and look around a little bit, decide which way you're going to go. Notice any changes as you do manage to relax. Maybe feel a change in your breathing, gives a better sense of circulation, so on and so forth. These are just the initial stages, and it's less about am I breathing right or anything like that, although it could be that, but more about just focusing your attention into where you actually are at this point. In and of itself, this is a valuable process. But as the start to a Tai Chi practice session, it gives you one aspect of this quality of sung that I've been talking about. But now we want to come back to the upright position. You bring your feet in and you come forwards. Find a suitable position on the chair. And it's worth taking time with these things at the start, because then you've got the foundation for everything else. About a third of your weight forwards. And ideally try and feel that the focal point for that weight is just behind the ball of each foot. Now that's quite difficult, but it's a sensation that's worth getting used to. So to help you with that, just push your heels up a little bit. It feels much stronger in the balls of your feet now. It will also sort of fairly quickly cause your calf muscles to tense up. So we don't want to hold this position for too long. But that feeling of the balls of your feet being pushed into the ground, and slowly lower your heels. And obviously that feeling in the balls of your feet reduces, but you can still feel that it's a major sort of point for the weight to settle. And if you were to go forwards any further, it'll be the balls of the feet will get pushed in to the ground. Not such a vital thing when we're in the chair-based exercises, but coming to the standing is going to be important. If you still can't feel it, try moving your feet back a little bit, not too much, and sometimes that helps as well. So supported in your upper body by your feet and your hips, and by the chair, of course. So looking for that same sense of releasing in your upper body, hopefully feeling some support from your back because remember you're angled a little bit forwards. But it's never going to be as straightforward and as obvious as when we're sitting back, because obviously you have to maintain some kind of structure, some kind of shape. So we don't want to go back to a very stiff feeling, but we do want to feel that the muscles and the other tissues of the body are engaged, but retain some of that softness, some of that suppleness. And beginning to move gently, turning your head. And we work to a point in terms of the range of the movement where we still feel that suppleness, but you can begin to make the judgment, make the call. It's about to change. I'm fine here. If I go any further, I can feel that beginning of the tightening, which you really don't want to do, especially with the neck. Go far enough to create on the opposite side to the way that you're turning a sense of extension that will then contract and pull you back. Hands in front of your shoulders, same idea. What you might be able to do with your shoulders, I wouldn't recommend it with the neck itself, but if you get to here and it's like, well, that's okay, but you go a bit further and it tightens up, but you want that slight extra movement. Start by just letting your hips drop down a little bit more, then let your shoulders drop so you create more space in your shoulders and your upper back. And you may get a little bit more movement that way. You won't always get that movement. There will always be a limit. But the limit of the movement is what I've referred to in the past as the soft boundary. So this is as far as I can go with the softer movement. I can go to here, but everything's tight there. So I'm not interested in that. Go the other way. And what we're trying to do in terms of the range of our movement, how far we're moving, is obviously we want to move a little bit further. We want to just make sure that we can continue with a good range of movement. But it's the soft boundary that we're trying to extend out through this process of releasing and settling and so on and so forth. Hands down to your sides. Rotating your arms. Elbows out a little bit. Not a long way out, because that makes it more difficult to move. But if I exaggerate, if you watch my elbows, see how they're going in and out a little bit? That is exaggerated. Normally it would be like this. There's still, it's just about see perhaps a little bit of movement in my elbows. So the whole of the arm, through the curve of the arm is rotated. That curve is too tight. then that becomes more difficult. Feel what's happening in your chest and your upper back. Winding around. Back the other way. And then easing forward. So that approach of working to the soft boundary and seeing if you can find a way to release a little bit can be applied to any of the movements at any point where you wish. You don't have to do it all the time. You shouldn't be practicing these movements always to improve this or improve that. Sometimes it's nice just to go through the movements and feel the flow of the movements, just enjoy the movement, enjoy what you can do. Don't ignore that aspect of it. We want to find a balance between having some kind of idea about how we would want to progress and yet not always feeling that we have to do that every single time we do Tai Chi, because we will miss things. It's like, again, if you're exploring that landscape, that wood or whatever, sometimes it's nice to go into somewhere new, somewhere you haven't been before, but also that doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile just wandering down the familiar paths, because there's always new stuff to see there. There's always something else to take in. So progression isn't just about moving further, doing a more complicated movement. It's about filling out the detail of the stuff that you know, but you don't perhaps know as well as you thought you did. It's going to be surprising. Oh, I haven't noticed that before. And sometimes that's lost if we're constantly saying, yeah, let's go further, let's go further. Turn just a little bit. And in the other direction. And then going around. Back in the other direction. Come back and step out with 1 foot. Measure your steps so you can get your foot comfortably onto the floor, heel and toes. And then the other side. And then come back to the original position. One thing you can do is sort of like walk down the path in a different way, I suppose you could say, to extend the analogy. So, for instance, if it's a useful image to you. See when you go through, particularly the initial exercises that you'll be more familiar with, you can maintain this idea of moving through water, for instance. It's quite a useful image because it can reveal all sorts of things going on within the body. So weight back in your hips, 2/3 of your weight back in your hips, hands down to your sides. We're going to make this rotating movement again, but as we move the weight. So moving through water, there would be any number of things that we might watch. First of all, you're moving into the water, so you feel the pressure against your chest and the front of your shoulders, and then going back against your back, and the back of your head, and so on. And trying to keep our body in line. So if you were in water, for instance, when you did this, you might find the water pressure pushing your head back or pushing your arm back. Neither of which we actually want to happen at the moment. So some kind of effort to maintain the structure of your body while you're in movement has to take place. It can't be. It's too subtle for a conscious effort to begin with. That's why the imagery helps. But as we become aware of it, that becomes, in a way, part of the image, I suppose you could say. It's not like saying to yourself, right, I'm going to reach out with one hand. It's much more subtle than that, and probably engages not just the big mobilizing muscles, but skeletal muscle, tendon, ligament, fascia, and so on and so forth. And we can just begin to feel the changes in the body. Rotating the arm in water is quite interesting because when we rotate the palms of the hands backwards, the pressure of the water is felt against the thumb side of your hand and your arm, and then eventually it moves around, in other words, and then it's more the little finger edge it's leading and pressing in to the water. You can feel that and imagine that with a sense for, and that may change the movement. And then fisherman cast a net. So palm in front of your arm, pressing into the water here. Back of your hand and arm, pressing through the water as you go forwards. And then this time, rolling the ball in. Again, just turn your attention to that idea of moving through water, as though the air is around you is thicker, as another way of describing it. A similar sensation actually can come in a wind. Obviously, you don't want to be out there if it's too strong, but sometimes if, for instance, you did this, or maybe the standing exercises, moving your weight forwards into the wind, and then just letting the wind push you back. So if you're finding it difficult to construct those images, sometimes it's useful to do something which helps you to create the sensation, and then you have something you can bring in to the practice. Not every image is going to work for you. And then pigeon spreads its wings, drawing your arms apart, Fascinating. So that image of moving through water helps us to develop a sense of connection in the body. It's not just one part of the body. Builds that quality of inner strength, and also just helps to generate the flow, because we will naturally just keep at least some of the joints of our body fairly soft if we're in water. This time, pushing away. It goes back, it goes forwards. Body, upper body follows that movement, and your arms directed really through the center of your body. One more time. This time, fist in your hands as you come back, elbows come straight back rather than out. Go forwards, and as you do, again, rotating first of all in your upper arm, and as your elbow straightens out a little bit, feel that rotation moving down in to your hand. When you come back, see where my elbow sits, don't pull your elbow back. So it's really quite a small movement, the angle of your shoulder, your armpit, and your elbow extending and contracting. So think of that opening here underneath your shoulder, and at the same time a slight extension in the elbow. The sum total in combination with your weight, get your hand fair distance forwards. So we learn to spread the effort through our body. We learn the value of small movements and small changes, which are the ones that we're most likely to be able to influence through our minds. Turning your hands out. So turning out. That's open feeling across your chest here, winding around as your hands drop down. Settle down in front of your hips. Last time, coming back, turn your hands palm down, turn, ease forward. Remember hips dropping back as your head and shoulders go forwards, lengthening through your back, all of which is very, very gentle. Change direction, polishing the table. So the lengthening in your back, for instance, rather than thinking of stretching forwards, have an image of the spaces between the vertebrae where the cartilage pads are, all just extending out a little bit. Multiply that up through your spine so it accumulates. And the way that we approach these movements does change how we do the movements. And the feel of them helps us. If we get the right image, the right approach, we can maintain quality of the movement, feel the sort of suppleness of the movement. Whereas if we just think of this as a stretch forward, we'll probably just stretch the arms out. Again, the elbow extends out a little bit. And that idea, as talked about through the spine, you know, you could almost imagine that through the whole of your arm and into your fingertips, almost on a sort of cell-to-cell basis. And then turning your hands palm. So these are all ways of exploring familiar movements, familiar pathways, but just taking a different perspective on them. Always remember that these small changes can make an enormous difference, because a small change in the right place at the right time can have a big effect all the way through your body. And this is where the mind training, the meditative, if you like, aspect of Tai Chi becomes so important. It's not all in the mind. It's not just about thinking the right thoughts, but it is about bringing together body and mind to work in this creative way. Again, if you had, when we were doing polishing the table, if you get that sense of lengthening through your spine, can you reproduce that in the upright position like this? It's more difficult because you can't sort of pull your head up, or you shouldn't be trying to pull your head up. So it's a push up, a kind of expansion upwards, and indeed sideways through your body. You notice here, I exaggerate, see how my elbows get pushed out a little bit. Now change to the wild goose, and that sideways movement becomes more pronounced. The effect of any of the exercises is something that could be traced through the whole of your body. One part of your body is in motion, the whole body is engaged in one way with that, one way or another with that movement. And yet at the same time, it's undoubtedly true that individual exercises will have a very particular effect. They'll highlight certain elements. So the nature of those internal relationships changes. Feet and hips will always be a factor and will always be, in a way, the initiators of the movement. But sometimes there'll be more emphasis on, you know, the lateral expansion as there is here. If we change to parting the clouds now, there's a little bit of sideways again, the elbows going out, but it moves into a lengthening again. So I often describe these things, and they're often described in a kind of linear sense. And of course, that's a useful thing. We build up lists, the feet, the hips, and the hands, and so on and so forth. but many of them will always will kind of interact in different ways. So if you imagine them all in a circle, things like feet, hips, the use of your weight, transfer of your weight, sinking of your weight, and so on, focusing of your attention would be more in the center of the circle. But sometimes, for instance, say with the focusing of your attention, just being aware of whatever's happening in your body is a good way to produce that focusing. Sometimes the focused attention can produce the movements and so on and so forth. And then your hands drop down. So this isn't something that I think about, it's something that I notice. As you get more used to the movements, you may well find yourself at times doing them on automatic, but your attention soon gets drawn back. And the fact that you're able to do them on automatic indicates a familiarity with them. And again, we can practice bringing a more focused attention. It's like you're walking down the path and suddenly you stop and you look closely at something. It's been there all the time, but you just haven't been in a position to notice it. Dragon plucks the stars from the sky. One more on each side. And then both hands coming in. Lengthening and then broadening. So this exercise is a good one for experiencing that contrast. What does lengthening mean? It's just a word until you have some kind of experience to associate. How does that feel in your back? How does the broadening feel? I mentioned the idea of the vertebrae and the spaces between the vertebrae expanding, but it's not just the vertebrae. You think about a muscle as being like an elastic band. When you pull on an elastic band, it opens out through the whole of the length. You know, the whole of the elastic band gets longer and thinner, and then when you release it, it gets shorter and fatter. Not just one part of it. Extend one foot, scooping the sea and looking at the sky. And then grasping the tiger's ears. Another way of using mind and body together is you can, with a movement that you're familiar with, if you're comfortable with grasping the tiger's ears, you have the memory of the shape And it's almost like, you know, the shape is there in front of you. And your intent is just to let your body flow into that shape. It won't work with every movement, and it won't work all the time. This is why I say that there are movements I've literally been doing for nearly 40 years now. And yet, every now and then, there can be a new kind of insight develop. Change to scooping this in, the sky on the other side. Well, sometimes, you know, you'll be doing an exercise and you'll notice something, then you realise you've done loads of that exercise. That often happens to me. I think, oh, that's interesting. And then 10 minutes later, I'm still doing it. I try not to do that in classes too often. People wonder what's going on. Why is he just doing this exercise over and over again? It can be quite a good thing to do. And then grasping the tiger's ears. Other times I might feel like doing a series of movements, not too many of them, maybe a Tai Chi form. It's getting that sense of the change from one to another. So some of it is about what's appropriate for you. What's an appropriate way for you to work at this particular time. One more time. Bring, put back in. Move your weight into your left hip. So going back, most of your weight in your left hip. Hold the ball with your right hand on top, your left hand underneath. Again, imagine being in water. So we're going to do part the wild horse's mane. Your weight's going to move diagonally into the left foot. And as it does, your body goes forward, your upper body goes forwards. This side of your body is shoulder, elbow on the left, pressing into the water, and then a turn, sliding your hands through the water. Coming back now, it's the right side of your body. You feel that pressure, that slightly denser feeling. You hold the ball, you turn, you move your weight across. So there's a contrast between those parts of your body that are leading the movement through the water and the ones that are following. I would describe it as a denser feeling as you lead into the water. Denser but not solid, because it's now going to flow into your right. And again, if this makes sense, you could almost imagine here, rather than thinking, right, I've got to move forwards, your intent is to push that denser feeling in your body into that right side of your body, and it sort of pulls you in to the move. And then going back, and sort of almost like water flowing in different ways through your body. It's quite a complicated exercise to do that with, because there's a number of stages, but it means that there's plenty to sort of feel in terms of those internal changes. I would describe the leading edge as yang, the following part of the body is yin. So we become aware of the change from yin to yang in the body. And that's in fact, an ongoing process in one way or another, and very much related to the flow, the movement of the energy through your body. If none of that is working, there's other ideas, aren't there? Here, maybe you're stretching out the elastic band between your hands, so you get this diagonal opening, extending up from hip to the opposite shoulder across the chest, and then contracting. And that can help to really generate that sense of movement and energy in your chest. with one more on each side. And then rest your hands down. Once again, rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. And over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder and your arm. And the other side. Upper part of your chest. Belly. And your legs. And then chin up. Circling your knees around. Changing to the other side. The direction, I should say. Okay, and then standing. So ironically, sometimes we do get that sense of going further, developing movements more by not aiming to do that, but as I say, aiming to sort of like just stroll down the familiar paths, but noticing more as we do that. Now, feet parallel, weight a little bit forward. Remember that sense of your weight pressing down through the balls of your feet, encountering the feeling of being pulled forward by letting your hips sink back, and sinking down, bring your hands around, a little sequence of 3, rooting down, and then the wild goose, and then part in the clouds. This is a favorite of mine for noticing that flow of change through the body. And it can draw your attention to very fine details. So not only is it significant for this movement, but it trains your attention on what to look for. It's like if you were walking down that pathway with somebody who knew a lot about trees or insects or something like that, they'd be pointing things out to you that you hadn't noticed before. And then if they walk down one path and you walk down another one, you'd have some of that awareness. You would notice things that you wouldn't have noticed otherwise. So sometimes I'm trying for a specific effect. I think, well, I've said before, belly, and then solar plexus for the wild goose, then upper part of the chest for part in the clouds. Other times I might do this with a sense of, let's see what happens. Not so much what am I telling the movements to do, but when I do the movements, how are they informing me? What are they offering me? Because there might be stuff, there will be stuff that I'm missing. Okay. Now, go 1 foot forwards, transferring your weight. So try and apply that fine-tuned awareness to this movement. It's very, very simple, isn't it? I mean, there's not a lot going on here. Get your stance right, transfer your weight. But what's going on in this exercise? Can you observe what's going on? Can you walk down this path with that sense of a heightened awareness? And is there anything else to discover? Can you imagine doing it in water, for instance? Raising your toes and heel. What difference does that make? So, sense of curiosity is quite good, especially when you're doing familiar movements. And then stepping in, push out. And then on the other side, and then raising your toes and your heel. Stepping in. Take step through for a few steps. And with that feeling of planting your foot on the floor, take your time. Change direction if you haven't done so already. Okay. Right foot forwards. Fisherman cast the net. And again, what do you notice in your sides, in your back, in your shoulders, in the movement of your weight? How do they all fit into the broad picture, shape of this familiar movement? So your legs are, when we were doing some of the exercises before, our legs were pushing us up and down. Now they're pushing us forwards and backwards, but there's still a movement and energy coming from the legs. So try this. Sink back and then think of the wild goose and that feeling of expansion that you get going up towards the solar plexus or whatever. And instead of your arms going forwards and backwards, you're not going up and down in your hips, but the energy is still there. Can you just feel some of those changes, particularly in the upper part of your body? So you're doing the wild goose Well, you are doing the wild goose, aren't you? No? And then settle into your back foot and turn as your arms swing out. And we have wind blows the willows. Maybe if it helps, stepping in. You may find when you bring your foot in, you can get slightly more of a turn. Maybe that makes a difference. Okay, and then left foot forwards, starting again with fisherman cast and net. Same process. What else are you noticing? What maybe the same things, maybe different things. Imagine the shape of the exercise. It's familiar enough, hopefully. Those people done this before. It's not a complicated exercise. So what we're going to do now is we're going to change the shape. We're going to bring in this sideways movement. Don't worry about the coordination. It could be done in different ways. Just link up the transfer of your weight forwards and backwards with that, well, with whatever you brought with you from the exercise, the wild goose. The best way of doing this for me is to have the expansion as my weight comes to the middle. Because then I get the push from the leg. But when I make the change to wind blows the willows, I stay in the leg, but I turn. Once again, processes that we learn about in a very linear way. This happens and this happens and this happens. Start to interact in a different way. Stepping in. It's not about what I tell you you should be feeling. Sometimes I will offer that, but your own observations, your own experience are also a very good way of learning, perhaps a better way of learning than any in the end. That is, after all, how these movements were originally developed. If somebody didn't sit down with a piece of paper and develop the wild goose or part in the clouds or any of those movements. And this time again, you can step through. Dragonfly skims the water. Do try and get that feeling of your hips dropping back with the stability. Apart from that, just notice what is going on. And then, if you haven't done so already, change in direction. One more time. And bring the feet parallel. Good. Go back to your chairs. I remember once, some years ago, going to an open day at a local woodland, Haley Wood. If anybody knows it, it's a lovely piece of woodland. and because it was an open day, they were having guided tours and so on and so forth. And I went on a tour with the voluntary warden there, and he'd been voluntary warden for something like 20 years or something like that. And as it happened, there was a group of us, but a lot of the people were just sort of like talking to each other. They were just wandering along. They weren't that concerned. So there was only a couple of us we ended up walking either side of him. And it was just amazing walking down pathways that I thought I knew quite well. I could go to Hayleywood, I could have a wander around. And he was just pointing out extraordinary things. I had no idea that this was where the badgers come through. And I thought, well, to me, it was just a gap in the hedgerow, but it was and things like that. And it was because he just walked those paths far more often than I did. So the familiar just opened out basically, and it struck me then that it's very much like Tai Chi, that sort of process, that something that is very familiar suddenly changes. A few years ago, with one of my teachers doing a movement, I can't even remember what the movement was now, but I know it was a very familiar movement, supposedly. And he said something, he offered an image, which I know he'd offered before, but the two came together, and suddenly the nature of the movement changed for me. And so I can't actually remember the image or what, but that's not really important. The important thing is that at that particular point, something new was revealed within the movement. So it's lovely to learn new movements, and it's really interesting to try more complex movements and so on and so forth. But don't do that at the expense of the familiar. And don't always think, well, I must learn this, I'm going to learn this new technique, going to do this better, and so on and so forth. Sometimes it's just a stroll down a familiar path could actually hold the key to improving as we put it in one way or another. So and it varies. I'm not saying we do that all the time, but certainly some of the time it's a useful thing to do. So just settling back into the basic posture and embrace tiger, return to the mountain. Looking for that sense again of any tightness and resistance, draining down, percolating down through your body. What's left is this lovely open, still but quite strong quality mountain. And rest. And just open your eyes. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. So enjoy walking down the familiar pathways sometimes.